Hello everybody, welcome to my YouTube channel NSR Azure Cloud. In today's session, I'll be discussing about what a cluster is, how do we create a cluster, and how do we attach a particular cluster to a notebook, and in that notebook what are the different kinds of languages which are supported, and how do we execute each and every language. I'll show you that. Okay. All right. So basically, what is a cluster? Cluster is a set of computational resources and configurations on which we'll be running our data engineering workloads, data science workloads, and data analytics workloads. Okay. So basically, cluster is a set of computational resources wherein we'll be running our notebooks, jobs, etc. Okay. All right. So what is a workload? Workload could be like it could be set of commands within a notebook, or it could also be an automated job. Okay. So workloads are nothing but a set of commands inside a notebook or an automated job. All right. So how many different types of clusters do we have? We have two different types of clusters: all-purpose cluster and job cluster. Well, what is an all-purpose cluster and what is a job cluster? Basically, all-purpose cluster is something, this can be used by multiple users, and multiple users can share this particular cluster. This particular cluster could be shared so that, it could be used to perform collaborative interactive analysis. Okay. So this all-purpose cluster is used by multiple users who can share this cluster, and using this cluster, they could do collaborative interactive analysis. And one more thing, in this all-purpose cluster, this can manually be terminated and restarted. Okay, so basically this can be manually terminated and restarted, whereas it is different to the job cluster. In this job cluster, right, we cannot create this manually. Okay, so whenever Databricks job is particular, like job scheduler is created, right, at that point of time this job cluster would be created. Okay, so once this job cluster is created, it will be based on the particular job completion. This cluster would be terminated. Okay, so one thing we'll have to remember is we cannot restart a job cluster. Okay, so we cannot restart a job cluster, and this will only be created by the Databricks job scheduler. We will not be creating it. Only Databricks job scheduler will be creating it, and once it is created, right, when it is completed, the cluster will terminate automatically. Okay, so that is about all-purpose cluster and job cluster. So now I'll explain it to you how to create a particular, how to run a Databricks, how to launch a Databricks workspace, and how do we create a cluster, and how to attach that particular cluster to the notebook. Okay, let me go to my portal.azure.com. So this is my portal.azure.com homepage. Okay, so this is the resource group which I've created in the earlier session. All right, so this was the workspace which I've created, right? So let me just click on this. This is nothing but it's an Azure Databricks workspace. Okay, this is the name which I've given, NSR Azure Cloud Workspace. So this brick symbol is there, right? This is nothing but, if you can see here the type, it is Azure Databricks service. Okay, just click here. All right, so you can see this option, right? Launch workspace. Just click on this launch workspace. So if you click on this launch workspace, a new window will be created, and it will take you to a sign-in page, and it will default gets the authentication done, and it will be authenticated. All right, so now this is my Azure Databricks portal. Okay, this is how my main page of Azure Databricks looks like. All right, so here what are the different things we can see? We can see common tasks, recents, and documentation. So here we'll be able to create a new notebook. A new notebook is nothing but, it's a place wherein we'll be writing our coding part. Okay, we have different kinds of languages, right? So in your feasible language, in your comfortable language, you can write the code in that particular notebook. Okay, so we have 4 different languages supported by our Databricks. One is R, second one is Scala, third one is SQL, and the fourth one is PySpark. Okay, so we have 4 different kinds of programming languages. So we can create a notebook from here directly. You can create a table, cluster, a job. These all are the different things. Okay, so if you want to directly import any kind of data, right, you can directly click here, and then you can choose this option, right? Drop files to upload or click to browse. So just choose this, and you'll be able to create this. Okay, so just you can browse any particular file here. So that is nothing but Databricks file system files. Okay, All right, so here what all we have data science and engineering and machine learning. Okay, under data science and engineering we have this is the web page which would be displayed. Okay, all right, so after that you can create notebook, table, cluster and job from here itself. Okay, if you don't open this, you can directly create from here as well. Click on this create option and then notebook, table, cluster, job, workspace. This workspace is something, users is nothing but your particular user would be displayed, and whenever you try to create any particular notebook, right, so those will be visible under this trash. Okay, so under this trash, whatever notebooks you have created, those many notebooks would be displayed here. Okay, all right, so under users we have this particular thing. Okay, so this is about users. So in our day-to-day scenarios, like if you are working for a project, right, then under this shared you'll be having different kinds of notebooks. Okay, so using those notebooks you can either enhance the code, or else you can create new notebooks and you can write your code. Okay, so we have different things called as users and shades. Users is something which is related to you. Shared is within the particular project there will be n number of people using, right, so all those people's notebooks you will be able to see here. Okay, so repositories is something like, this is related to Azure DevOps. Whenever you write any particular code, right, so here will be pointing to some GitHub would be pointing to, and whenever you write any particular code in this notebook, right, that will be in the background, it will go and sit in the DevOps. Okay, so that is about this repos. And we have different tabs called as data, compute, jobs, settings. In settings we have user settings, admin console, manage account. So if you want to manage your particular account, you can go here. These are admin related settings, these are user related settings for this particular Databricks. Okay, so if you want to see, you can even log out from here. Okay, and menu options, auto, expand, collapse, these all are the different things which we have. And compute is a place wherein, you'll be creating the cluster. I'll come to the screen in a while. And data, so here if you can see here, right, you can create this particular under this database. What do database have? Database will possess tables, right? So under this particular database you can create tables. Just click on create and you'll be able to create tables. Okay, all right, and then come into compute. This compute, so what are we supposed to do in this particular session? In this session I'll try to show you how to create a cluster. Okay, so as I've told you, right, we have different types of clusters: all purpose cluster and job cluster. So all purpose cluster and job cluster, I've told you, right, job cluster will not be creating, and this will be created whenever a particular job is scheduled. At that point of time this job cluster would be created. Okay, so this manual restarting will option will not be available here, whereas in this particular cluster you can create this cluster and you can manually start this particular cluster. Okay, you can manually terminate it and restart this particular cluster, and this cluster can be reused by multiple users. Okay, so that they'll be able to perform their collaborative interactive analysis part. All right, so now let me just click on that create cluster and let me give some name like demo NSR Azure Cloud Cluster. Okay, so now I'm trying to create some sample cluster called as NSR Azure Cloud Cluster. Okay, and if you can see here, we have different kinds of cluster modes. What are they? High concurrency, standard, and single node. Okay, these are the three different cluster modes which we have. Okay, what is high concurrency? High concurrency is basically, whenever you choose this particular high concurrency option, you can see here how many worker nodes and how many driver nodes are there. We have 2 to 8 worker nodes and 1 driver node. Okay, what is a driver node and what is a worker node? Driver node is something, it will manage the state information of worker node. Okay, so basically what is a worker node? Worker node is something wherein this will actually does the work for us. Okay, a driver node will just manage the state information of worker nodes, whereas worker node will does the actual work. All right. So in this particular high concurrency, we'll be having 2 to 8 worker nodes and one driver node. And if you can see here, these are the number of memory, 56 GB of memory. It will be available, and this much amount of GB of memory is present. And it will have these many number of codes, 6 to 16 codes, and under the worker nodes and driver nodes will have 8 codes. Okay. So this is hard coded at this at the top, so you can just once you click on this particular high concurrency, you will be able to see how many worker nodes I have, how many driver nodes I have, and how much memory it is occupying, and what are the different codes associated with it. Okay. All right, and this is something like Databricks units. Okay, so this Databricks units will be like 6 to 18 per hour. Okay, so this is something like this will be per hour. It will show you how much amount it will be charging. So it is basically 6 to 18. All right, so after that, inside this high concurrency, this high concurrency is used in our projects. Okay, so because multiple people will be working in a single project, right, like data scientists, data analytics people, and data engineer people, so we'll be they in the projects we'll be using this high concurrency. Okay. Okay, high concurrency mode we'll be using in a particular project, so that there will be no delay or latency when we are trying to access particular notebook or particular cluster. Okay, so that is why in our projects we'll be using this high concurrency mode. Standard mode. Coming to standard mode, what happens here? So basically, who are the new developers who are trying to use it for the first time, right? Those people will be using this. Here, if you can see, 2 to 8 worker nodes are there and one driver node is there, and these codes of this particular driver node and worker nodes have been changed, if you observe. Okay, from the high concurrency mode to the standard mode, this particular things, right, this memory and codes have been changed. Okay, this is basically used for new developers. All right, coming to the single node. In the single node, right, we don't have any worker nodes. Okay, we only have a single driver node, and there are no worker nodes. If you see, there is no memory associated with this particular worker node, but 14 GB of memory associated with this particular driver node, and 4 codes are associated. Okay, here we do not have any worker nodes, and we have some memory allocated. All right, so after this, what do we have after this cluster? So I'm just choosing this single node for POC purpose. Okay. All right, so what is we even have this Databricks runtime version. Okay, so for Azure Data Factory, as we have integration runtime, similarly for Databricks we have database runtime version. Let me just see how many we have here. Okay, these are the different kinds of versions which are present. These are the latest versions. Okay, so by default I'm just choosing whatever is there. I'm just clicking that. Okay, if you see here, the Spark version is 3.1.1 and the Scala version is 2.12. If you choose this particular runtime as 8.3. Okay, so if you choose the particular runtime as 8.3, Spark version would be 3.1.1. If you choose it as latest one, then the Spark version has been changed. Okay, 1.2 is there, and then 3.2 is the latest version currently. So I'm just choosing the default one. I'm not changing anything here. And if you can see here, autopilot options. So what is this autopilot option? Autopilot option is something like, if you want to enable the auto scaling, right? This will basically use to increase or decrease the worker nodes based on workload. Okay. So whenever there is more workload, right? Whenever you're trying to perform huge amounts of analysis or anything, if you want to perform on huge workloads, right, on huge data, at that point of time, if you just click on this particular option, this autopilot options, what would it do? It would basically autopilot option would basically, if you enable this auto scaling, right, it will basically use to increase or decrease the worker nodes based on our workload. Okay, so this terminate after these minutes of inactivities, whatever amount you specify here, right, for that much amount of time it will be active. Okay, once this time limit is exceeded, once this timeout occurs, then this particular cluster would become inactive. Okay, once it gets inactive, what are you supposed to do? If you want to use that particular cluster, then you will have to again start the cluster. Okay, So it will you can specify as much number of time amount of time you want. Okay, I'm just giving 10 minutes. Once this particular cluster once you're not using this particular cluster for 10 minutes, okay, you have just left your system like that and went and timeout had happened, then you'll no longer be able to use this particular cluster. Okay, what are you supposed to do? It will become inactive. So at that point, what are you supposed to do? If you want to use this particular cluster, then go here and then you'll have to just click on start. Okay, it will take a while to start, like it will take 1 to 2 minutes to start the cluster. So after it gets started, right, you can execute your particular code which you have written in your notebook. All right, so node type, we have different kinds of node types. Like this is basically, which will be you having this particular memories and codes, so those will be present in our particular node types. Okay, and whatever you want, you can choose this particular thing. All right. So dbu for hour, that means Databricks units per hour, it is 0.75 if you are using the single node cluster. Okay. Previously it was high when you are using high concurrency, and it has changed when you are using standard mode. Okay. So now I'm just selecting the default one, which is a single node. This is basically doesn't have any kind of worker nodes, but only single driver node. All right. Let me just click on this create option. So once you click on that create, if there are no errors, this particular cluster would be created. If there are any errors, right, you can check the errors and you can rectify those errors. So it will take a while to get, thing. Meanwhile, I'll open another tab and I'll show you how to create different, I'll show you how to attach a particular cluster to a notebook. Okay. So for that, I'll create a notebook. By the time it gets run, right, I'll just create a notebook and give some name as sample notebook. Okay, so if you can see here, how many languages does my particular notebook support? It will support 4 different languages, as I've said you, right? It supports Python, Scala, SQL and R. So these are the different languages it supports. So in your comfortable language, you can choose any language present here. I'm choosing Python, and I can choose the particular cluster. Okay, since I am trying to create this cluster, right, it is auto populating here. Okay, so I can just click on this particular cluster and click on create. Okay, so if I do that, my notebook will be created. Since my particular notebook is in Python, if you can see here, the notebook is created in Python, right? So Python is my default language. Okay, I'm just writing some code in Python language and let's see. I'm just giving some variables with some values. Okay, so this is in Python. Once the cluster gets activated, right, we'll be able to execute this particular code. Okay, so this is something like it's a cell, we call it. Okay, so whatever code we have written in this particular notebook, right, we have written a is equal to 2, b is equal to 20, this thing is there, right? So this is nothing but it's a cell. Okay, cmd1, that is command 1, this command 1 is nothing but it's a cell. So now you can see, right, the cluster is started, that means it is active. So now you will be able to run this particular cell. How to run it? We have multiple options, like we can click on this run cell here, or else you can just click on shift enter. Okay, shift enter will also serve the purpose. It will run. See, it is waiting to run. Since the cluster is active, you will be able to run this particular code. Okay. Okay, so if you can see here, now we are able to print the content, right? So what are we doing? I'm just writing a simple Python query and I am trying to execute it. How can I execute? Either I can go there and run it, or else I can just create, I can just click on this shift enter. Okay, so this is in Python language. All right, so now if you want to choose this SQL language, how do you do? You can just you can just write some query, select suppose I want to give my current timestamp. Okay, so how do I give it? Current underscore timestamp. Okay, since this is in SQL, right? How does this particular notebook identify this is in SQL? It cannot identify. So that is why if you are writing a particular query in SQL, you will have to explicitly specify this percentile symbol, and after percentile you should give SQL. Okay, that means it will you are telling this particular notebook explicitly, like I am writing the code in SQL. Okay, you don't have to go and change there. You can directly give here percentile SQL and write the code in SQL language. Okay. Okay, so if you can see here, today's date is 10th, 28th October. It is giving the current timestamp. Okay, so this is how you will be running a particular SQL query. All right. So now you want to write it in Scala. Suppose. Okay, how do you write? If you want to change the language from SQL to Scala, you can directly click on this percentile Scala. Okay, percentile Scala will make your notebook understand that, okay, I'm writing a code in Scala. So it will accept that particular syntax. Okay, so I'm just creating few dummy small piece of code. We'll see how to write the code. Okay, a plus b. Let me just print it. Okay, now I'm running it. It will take a little time to run. Okay, so if you can see here, what is it giving? It is giving me a value, b value, and the output of it. Since I'm trying to print c, right? So it is displaying c. C is nothing but a plus b. So this is how you'll be writing code in Scala. Okay. All right. So now let us go for R. Okay. In this sample R language, I have just specified print hello NSR. So let us try to execute it. Okay, so if you have just giving this particular print hello NSR, we are getting hello NSR value. So this is how we'll be creating different codes in a particular language. And if you have chosen a particular language when you are trying to create a notebook, right, you can change it using this percentile, and you can specify that particular language. Okay, if it is SQL, then percentile SQL. If it is Scala, percentile Scala. If it is R, percentile R. Okay, any point of time you can convert that particular default language to your mentioned language by using percentile, that particular programming language. All right, so now you have understood how to create a cluster and how to attach that particular cluster to the notebook, right? You can also terminate the cluster. Either you can detach the cluster just by clicking here. Okay, you can just click here and detach the cluster, or else you can go to this particular compute option, and then you can see here, right, it is running. Here you can click on this square bar. Okay, if you just click on that and click on confirm, it will terminate your cluster. Okay, so this is how a cluster could be created, and cluster could be attached to a particular notebook, and we can execute different languages in that particular notebook. Okay. All right, thank you for watching my video, guys. Please do subscribe if you haven't done it already. Thank you for supporting.